There are cases around the world with whom the suspects are who you least expect, and these cases make you question whether you can trust those closest to you. The case of Marc Despain is no exception. Hello everyone and welcome to What Not Box. Before we begin, viewer discretion is advised, as this case contains details that some may find disturbing. Tonight we'll be taking a closer look at a case involving unthinkable acts. But before all this, we need to understand who Marc Despain was. In Jonesboro, Arkansas, April 16th, 1977, a boy named Marc Despain was born. Now, Jonesboro is a town where communities seem to thrive and people seem to just know each other. Growing up, Marc was a bright and active individual. He went to Nettleton High School where he graduated in 1995. Marc was an individual who lived in his faith at his local Baptist church. To those around him, he appeared to be building a meaningful life, but behind the smiles and appearances, a far darker story was only just beginning. Marc Despain met his wife, Michelle Kelly, during their teenage years, and Marc fell deeply in love with her, of course. Now, Michelle Kelly had a previous relationship beforehand, where she had her first child, Brooke. They would later have their own child, and in 1996, at just the age of 19 and 18, both Marc and Michelle got married, due to the expectations and pressures from their loved ones. To the couple, it felt as though they needed to marry, so there was a level of uncertainty in the air. And as you can imagine, a lot of responsibility was all of a sudden on their shoulders. The beginning of their new life was difficult, but Marc took on his responsibility as husband and father seriously, taking on Michelle's daughter Brooke as his own alongside his own children. Marc went into real estate with his mother Tanner and his father Jack, with no inheritance or anything of the like. He built his real estate business through hard work and dedication. Michelle worked at a bank, but later played a fundamental role in the family real estate business as a bookkeeper. And so from the outside, it seemed as though the Despain family lived the American dream. They had a successful business, a loving family, and home. And they were able to go on these beautiful holidays. What people didn't realize, though, was that they were simply seeing the tip of the iceberg, and there were deeper things going on behind the scenes. Here we have Carl Kelly, Michelle's father. This man came from a simple working-class background, not used to the financial means that his daughter now possessed, living with Marc. Eventually, on his own accord and intentions, he decided to work for the family business. He was a manager of sorts. He would seek out tenants for rent. He was doing well, but he had a problem. See, he didn't like the fact that he had to listen to Marc as his boss. A successful operation of a business involves good communication skills amongst each person, and so Marc was simply doing his role and given tasks when it was needed. Perhaps Carl didn't like being ordered around by someone younger than himself, especially someone close to his daughter. Naturally, Carl's bitterness only grew from there. Earlier, I mentioned that Marc started and built his real estate business with his parents. Oftentimes, arguments would rise and things would escalate over important matters such as money. Michelle would get into arguments with Marc's father, and like Carl's bitterness over Marc's control, tension between Michelle and Marc's father would only get worse. Michelle began to accuse him of having inappropriate images of her daughter Brooke. An accusation such as this was simply insane. This left Marc in a really difficult predicament, but in the end, he sided with Michelle and filed a police report against his father. The police thoroughly investigated this issue and all they found were harmless selfies that Brooke took on his phone. No charges were ever filed. However, as you can imagine, things were never quite the same after this. Jack Despain's relationship with his son, as well as his wife, Tana Despain, was ruined as a result. Marc stopped communicating with his father, and Tana decided to leave him temporarily. As time went by, Marc grew dependent on Michelle and Carl Kelly as a result of his shattered relationship with his father. Marc, being the loving father that he was, worked tirelessly to make his family happy and prosperous. Michelle, on the other hand, was working her usual role as bookkeeper, but little to Marc's knowledge, Michelle was hiding things. The family business had accumulated $2 million in debt, an outstanding amount of money. As Marc was so dependent on Michelle, he trusted her with open arms and so wasn't totally aware of the large financial hole that they were in. Not only that, Marc was unaware of Michelle's secret affair with a co-worker at her bank job. And if that wasn't enough, she would give the individual money to fund their living expenses. I mean, just think about it. All that money that was given in secret to this other person, whilst her own family, her own children, were in financial distress. And yes, this money came from the family business. Money that was supposed to help reduce the debt and get the family out of the misery that they were in. Just let that sink in, how low and selfish a person can be to do these disgusting acts. And the worst is yet to come. Eventually, Marc found out about a few things that would spark arguments between the two. And ultimately, he mentioned a divorce. Now, this would mean that Michelle's comfortable but secretive life would all come crumbling down. It would also mean that she would lose whatever payout she would get from the life insurance policy if Marc died. This, and amongst other things, were all conjuring up within Michelle. And at this point, the ticking time bomb that is called Michelle decided to give in and plot the demise of Marc. Michelle and her father, Carl Kelly, contacted a tenant, Johnny Hubbard, who had local connections within the criminal world, and they swiftly came into contact with an individual known as Terence Barker, with whom Michelle offered over $7,000 for the death of Marc Despain. They wanted to stage a robbery, and on August 24th, 2011, Michelle made it clear to her father and said, "It has to be today." Michelle initiated the plan and convinced Marc to grab lunch. They ate and made small talk at a restaurant. Whilst the two were chatting, Terence Barker made his way to their family home, and by any means necessary, he broke in, as orchestrated by Michelle. There, at the family home, he hid, waiting for his target to come back home. They had finished their lunch together, and with no further plans in Marc's mind, he naturally proceeded to get ready to go back home. Michelle, on the other hand, said that she had things to do. Marc made his way back home, and at some point, he bought some ice cream for his loving children, a simple reminder of a man who loved and cherished his family. He proceeded to go back home. He walked through the door and set the ice cream down for his children in the kitchen. Moments later, the loving, hard-working man that his friends and family members deeply treasured was shot twice, in the back in cold blood. All of this was orchestrated by a selfish person who seemed to value money and her secretive affair over her own family, her children. Michelle came back home to find Marc's lifeless and stone-cold body on the floor. Eventually, 911 responders came swiftly to the scene and discovered that the whole house was in a complete mess. At first, to the investigators, the grim scene looked as though the intruder had scoured the place, and perhaps Marc had startled the intruder, leading to his death. However, the investigators noticed that no valuables, such as jewelry or any luxury items, had been taken, which was odd. When Michelle was interviewed at the station, she acted strange, and her behavior was inconsistent, like she was trying to force some type of grieving emotion. Naturally, you'd expect someone to be in a high level of shock and emotion upon the news of the death of a loved one, especially when something as horrible as this has happened. The investigators took note of her odd behavior and came to the conclusion that this was not merely a robbery gone wrong, rather something more malicious. To add to the investigators' suspicions, both Jack Despain and Carl Kelly were found arguing outside of the property. More notably though, Carl Kelly was seen accusing and insulting Marc's father. Carl was later interviewed, and similar to Michelle, investigators noticed that he showed no emotion towards the death of his son-in-law and was more interested in directing the blame on Jack Despain. As the investigation continued, a tip came through about an individual bragging about his involvement in the crime. This was none other than Terence Barker. Another thing to note, on the day of the crime, a blue Mercedes was seen in the vicinity of the murder, which was eventually traced back to Johnny Hubbard. In addition to this, forensics worked tirelessly to retrace any potential evidence, such as phone calls or texts, between Michelle and her father Carl. Forensics managed to source deleted text between the two, which would confirm what they suspected. Michelle orchestrated the whole plan with the help of her father, where they sought out Johnny Hubbard, which connected them with Terence Barker. As a result of these findings, Terence Barker received 35 years for first-degree murder, as well as Carl Kelly. Both Johnny Hubbard and Michelle received charges for hindering apprehension, with Michelle receiving 30 years. In the end, those closest to Marc Despain, especially his children, suffered deeply because of Michelle's selfish and unthinkable actions, as well as those who were involved. A loving father lost his life far too soon. A son who never got to repair the relationship with his parents due to false accusations. Let's remember Marc Despain, not for the tragedy of his death, but for the loving person and devoted father that he was. I'd like to thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned for more.